So we're starting to talk about Pidyon Haben. It's a good time also to pay attention. We just, without even realizing it, we had in our midst two candidates for a while. So think about it. Do you have any friends, relatives who might meet this criteria? The criteria are as follows. They have to be a firstborn, no child or even no miscarriage previously to that mother. The mother obviously has to be Jewish at the time of birth. Neither grandfather could be a Kohen or a Levi. If it meets that, if somebody meets that criteria and may not have had a Pidyon Haben, so then this is a mitzvah that has to be done. So think through your friends, relatives. It's quite common that it's not okay. This is a mitzvah which is mentioned. Sorry, yes.
What if the mother is a boss Levi or a boss?
No, then it doesn't qualify. Like I said, if either of the grandfathers are a Kohen or a Levi, there's no Pidyon Haben. Okay. It's a mitzvah. What I'm going to try and do in the next little while is give an overview of the mitzvah from different angles, and then obviously, Torah Arucham in the Eretz, we could go on and on, but I want to try and give an overview of the main topics related to Pidyon Haben. So Pidyon Haben is mentioned. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. It is mentioned no less than 9 times in the Torah. 9 times is the Torah mentioned this mitzvah. I don't know. I know that when it says by Bris Milah, that is 13 covenants are associated with Bris Milah. I don't know of another mitzvah, even Shabbos, I don't believe is mentioned 9 times. I think Shabbos is mentioned 7 times. But I don't know of another mitzvah that I can't guarantee this, but I'm not aware of another mitzvah that is mentioned so many times in the Torah. And not only is it mentioned so many times, it's also one of the only mitzvahs which the reason for the mitzvah, one of the few mitzvahs which the reason for the mitzvah is explicit in the Torah. There are a number of different angles of the reason, the way it's either explicitly or implicit by the psukim. The gist of it is that the firstborns became sacred, sanctified to Hashem at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the idea is that Hashem killed all the firstborns in the land of Egypt. So by sparing the Jewish firstborns from being annihilated in Makas B'chayros, so they became sacred to Hashem. And the Sefer HaChinuch adds that it's not just that they became sacred to Hashem in theory, but it's also for us. When we do this mitzvah, we remind ourselves of the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim, as we find that many mitzvahs in the Torah are Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, are associated with Yetzias Mitzrayim. In addition, there is a concept in Torah, which actually the Rabbi spoke about this many times, about Reishis Harisei Seichem, that you always give the first things to the Kohen. Why do you give the first things to the Kohen? Because the Kohen is the representative of Hashem in this world. So it's a way of recognizing that everything that you have really belongs to Hashem. So if we give the beginning of our fruit, we give the bikurim to the Kohen. From if a person has cattle, so the first of the firstborn sheep also goes to the Kohen, and the first sharings of the wool goes to the Kohen. The first of your food, you make a dough, you give before you eat anything, you separate challah and give it to the Kohen. And similarly, the first of our very own fruit, so to speak, of our offspring, we quote unquote give to the Kohen. As you'll see, the nusach is when the mitzvah is done, there's a conversation with the Kohen. The ideal mitzvah is done by the father when the baby is a month old, and where he has the conversation with the Kohen. If the child reaches bar mitzvah and the mitzvah was not done by his father, so then it becomes the child's own mitzvah to do it. And the conversation is like, well, what do you want? Do you want to keep the baby, or do you want to keep your money? Or in the adult, do you want to keep yourself, or do you want to keep the money? Obviously, it's not actually a choice, and nobody wants to keep the money instead of the baby or themselves. But the idea is that there's a number of different explanations of why we express it in that type of language. But the idea is that we want to emphasize that this money is in fact substituting the person, the baby, or oneself. In the Zohar, it says that any firstborn is under the authority, I guess, the shlita of 2 reshuyos, of 2 domains, that of life and that of death. And when a bechor is redeemed from the Kohen, then he removes himself from the reshus of death, of the hepech hachaim, the opposite of life. And there are many stories in Svarim brought about a certain person in a certain town, all different stories in different communities over the years, where there was a person who was suffering from all sorts of things, from bad health and the like, and then it turned out that for some reason they were not redeemed from the firstborn. They were not redeemed from the Kohen when they were a baby. I imagine that often the reason was financial constraints, and we'll see later. We're going to see how much money it is. But Baruch Hashem, now we live in a time of affluence. For most people, it's not an amount of money that's very difficult. But you could imagine that back in the day, it may have been it was a large sum of money for an average guy to come up with. So perhaps that's the reason why it was sometimes neglected. Other reasons given for the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben are associated with, the Medrash brings that it's associated with telling Yosef HaTzadik, who was the Bechor of Rachel, right? He was the first one of Rachel, and it actually matches up, because it says that the Shvatim sold Yosef for how much money? In Parashas Vayeshev, they sold him for? 20, no, it says Esrim Kosef, as we'll see soon. Chazal seem to be understanding that the currency that they sold him for was 20 dinars, and each shekel has 4 dinars. So 20 kesef equals 5 shkalim, 5 sloim, which is the exact amount that we do Pidyon Haben for, so that matches up. In addition, it's also mentioned that it's related to the atonement for the sin of Chava. Chava introduced death into the world, and so this is why one of the reasons why it's brought, why we follow the maternal firstborn and not the paternal firstborn, is because Chava brought death into the world, and so it's when she gives birth to a firstborn and brings life into the world, then somehow that's connected to the mitzvah of redeeming the firstborn. Finally, it's also mentioned that the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben is an atonement for taivas neurim or chatas neurim, for sins, what we call in Chassidus vaguely sins related to youthfulness, as we discussed in Tanya chapter 7. And specifically, the firstborn who's born when his father is still in his young, hot, passionate years, when he's more subject to lustfulness, so then that's even a more reason to have an atonement for that reason. It's interesting that it's brought also that eating from the meal of a Pidyon Haben, we mentioned a few times, it's a Sudas mitzvah, eating from the meal of a Pidyon Haben is especially it's special more than any other Sudas mitzvah in a way, and it's brought that it corresponds to 84 times fasting. That if you eat from a Pidyon Haben, it's as if you fasted 84 times. What's the significance of fasting 84 times? So you may recall from Igeres HaTshuvah that fasting 84 times is the amount of fasts which the Arizal instituted that a person should fast to atone for sins related to the mission to spilling of seed, to the mission of seed wastefully. So what's the connection between 84? I didn't look it up in Kisvei Arizal, but I imagine it's something to do with the fact that Yaakov Avinu was 84 when he first when Reuven was conceived and born, and like Rashi brings over there in Chumash that Yaakov Avinu never had any mission of seed previously, so perhaps it's connected to that. But it's brought that's eating from a Pidyon Haben, it has that a special quality, which is one of the reasons why it is common custom by Pidyon Haben. We didn't do it today, but often you see it by a baby's Pidyon Haben. They'll bring the baby in on a silver tray. Actually, when I told my son that we're having a Pidyon Haben today, he couldn't understand how we're going to put somebody so big on a silver tray. But so they put on the baby, they put jewelry and they put sugar cubes and garlic cloves. What's the idea of sugar cubes and garlic cloves? So one of the reasons given is that because it's so special to eat from the Suda of a Pidyon Haben, so everybody could take home some sugar and some cloves, which are foods that A, you put a little bit into other foods and it gives it a flavor, and B, they have a long shelf life. So those are two things which you could sort of extend the quality of the food eating from the Suda of the Pidyon Haben for a long time. Now, a number of questions. Also, by the way, in connection to Yosef Suda, it's also mentioned one of the reasons why we're so into having a meal by Pidyon Haben is because to atone. We said before is connected to atoning for the sin of selling Yosef HaTzadik. So we find in the Torah it says that after they sold him, they had a meal. So now we're countering that meal which was involved with the terrible thing of selling Yosef. Now we're having a meal and connected with the Pidyon Haben, which is atoning for that. Now. One of the obvious questions with Pidyon Haben is why does it only apply for firstborn males and not for females? Surely, if it's connected, as it is primarily written in the Torah, that it is connected to saving the Bechoros from Makas Bechoros, from the death of the firstborn in Egypt, surely in Egypt also the female firstborns were killed. Not only that, even Gadol Babayis, even the elder of every house, even if it wasn't the firstborn to the mother, was just a paternal firstborn, if you recall from Rashi and Parshas Boy, were also killed. So why do we find that the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben only applies to male firstborns and not to female firstborns, and only to firstborns of the mother's first rather than the father's first? So a number of, I was actually once by Pidyon Haben in Rabbi Shanowitz's house, where Rabbi Gurari, when his first son was born, so there was a Pidyon Haben, and Rabbi Gurari spoke for a long time just on this question to explain why it's only for boys, not for girls, and why it doesn't apply to Levium. There's many questions, but I'm just going to give a brief overview for now. So one of the reasons suggested by the Chidah in Simchas HaRegel is that in Egypt there was two statuses. There was Egyptians and there were other nations who happened to be in Egypt for whatever reason. So the Chidah suggests that only the Egyptian firstborn girls died. But the other nations who happened to be in Egypt, so the firstborn males died, but not the females. So therefore, the Jewish females were never subject to being. They weren't spared by Makas Bechoros. They were never subject to Makas Bechoros in the first place, and that's one reason why the females are not subject to the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, or I guess it would be Pidyon Habas in that case. And another reason, interesting suggested, is that it's brought to, I believe this is that it's brought in the Medrash that at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim there was a kitrug. The Malachim were, you're a lawyer, how do you say kitrug? They were, what's the word? There's the prosecution. They were the prosecution. Yeah, they were being the prosecution. They were suggesting that maybe the Jewish people don't deserve any of the miracles of coming out of Egypt, because halalo ivdei avodah zarah, halalo ivdei avodah zarah, that all the Jewish people were also steeped into pagan idolatrous culture. So, and nevertheless, we got redeemed. So it's a major miracle. However, we know that the women in Egypt were never. They always had their heads screwed on straight. They never fell to the temptation of avodah zarah, and so lechatchila they were never subject to being included in the Egyptians' downfall.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm a little confused about this firstborn business. Like the firstborn male, who's not necessarily the firstborn child.
No, it has to be. It has to be that there was no. Not only was there no child beforehand, even if there was a miscarriage beforehand, it also there would not be a Pidyon Haben following. However, I should really add an important caveat, and I know somebody who made this mistake, that it's only if it was a miscarriage which was potentially a viable child. So if it was some sort of, which sometimes happens, different type, you call them pregnancies, but it's never really a fetus. It's just some sort of sorry.
Lighted pregnancy.
They're called teratogens.
I'm saying, one second. The word I'm looking for is, I guess, tumor, some sort of growth that has some of the symptoms of a pregnancy, but it's not pshat that if it would have remained for 9 months, it would have become a viable child. So if somebody has that type of pregnancy, so then the following there would be a Pidyon Haben.
What about what do you call the one when it is it ectopic?
Ectopic pregnancy, I think, would still qualify for Pidyon Haben. I think so. Ectopic pregnancy, if I understand correctly, is, I may be wrong, I don't know. Because ectopic pregnancy is, if I understand correctly, is, at least in theory, a potential viable fetus. It's just in the wrong place. So, well, you could maybe take it out and implant it. I don't know. But I don't know. I'm not expert. If anybody, I'm just saying this because if it's Negei Lamaisa to anybody who's here or who's listening to the class or whatever it is, I just want to sort of, obviously in any case of doubt, you consult with your local Orthodox rabbi and we figure it out. Another reason given why it does not apply to the girls, to the females, is that, as I mentioned before, that one of the reasons why, one of the reasons for the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben is associated with atoning for Chava, that because Chava brought death to the world, so therefore this is an atonement for her sin. So we know that in Chazal we always associate the birth of a son to the mother and the birth of a daughter to the father. That Isha Mazras Tchila, if the woman I'm not sure exactly how to translate the word mazras, but if the woman contributes to the conception first, so then it brings about a son, and if the man contributes to the conception first, then it produces a girl. Now, we're not going to get into exactly what that means and how to understand it or reconcile it with contemporary science. That's not for now. But because of that, that's also suggested that because it has to do with Chava, so therefore it specifically relates to sons and not to daughters. Now, why do we have it with 5? Why do we? What's the amount of 5 shekels? So we know that it's that amount because it says so in the Torah. But why 5 shekels? So I already mentioned before. One of the reasons is because that corresponds to the amount of money that was brought in. That Yosef was sold for. Now there's an obvious klutz kasha over here, which I was hoping somebody would ask. Hold on a second. If that's the case, why do we say that people from the tribe of Levi are exempt from Pidyon Haben? Levi was involved in the sale. We should say people that are from the tribe of Yosef are exempt from Pidyon Haben. So, okay, there's different ways of understanding it. One of the suggestions is that we're not actually saying that this is an atonement for that. We're merely saying that we use that episode as precedent to determine what the quote price of a child is. So, because that's how much they sold the person for, so we use that as precedent. Okay, there's probably other ways to understand it as well. All right. Now, I'll give over. So that's a sort of brief overview of the different reasons for the mitzvah. There is a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, which we have 2 versions of this mimer printed in Sefer Memorim Tov Kuf Samach Vav, which is it's Erev Chanukah, so it would be in December, I guess, of 1804. And this mimer that the Alter Rebbe shared at the Suda of a Pidyon Haben of Reb Baruch Shalom ben Hatzamach Tzedek, which is the Rebbe's great-great-grandfather. That means the Rebbe's father was Reb Levi Yitzchak, whose father was Reb Baruch Shnei Zalman, whose father was Reb Levi Yitzchak, whose father was Reb Baruch Shalom, whose father was the Tzemach Tzedek. So Reb Baruch Shalom was the Rebbe's great-great-grandfather, and he was born in the month of Cheshvan in Tov Kuf Samach Vav in 1804, and the Alter Rebbe, so this is the Alter Rebbe's great-grandson, the Alter Rebbe said a mimer at his Pidyon Haben. It's, as is often the case in the Alter Rebbe's Memorim, especially from it can be very brief without a lot of elaboration, and I imagine, I didn't have the time to pursue this in great depth, but I imagine that if we look through Memorim of the later Rabbim, you might find further elaboration and detail to these ideas shared in this mimer, but I'll just share briefly the Nakuda of this mimer. Is basically that there are 3. We're now in the days of the Sphira, so we talk about the Midas. So essentially, one of the ways of dividing the Midas is to right, left, and middle. So counting from all the Spheres, the Kav HaYamin, the right side is Chachma, Chesed, and Netzach. The left side is Bina, Gvura, and Hoid, and the middle is Das, Tiferes, and Yesod, and Malchus. So the Kohen, they're connected to the right side, which starts with Chachma, and the Yisrael, the Bechorim, they're connected to the middle side. So the middle has this sort of, again, this this contrast, that on one hand it starts the lowest. We're starting from Das, so that's the lowest point to start. However, there's always this idea that Das is more intrinsically connected to Keser, which is even above Chachma. So the middle is like, on the one hand it's starting the lowest, on the one hand, at least in a deeper sense, the Kav HaMitzvah has even more to offer than the right and the left. So the bottom line is, again, just to summarize briefly what I believe the Alter Rebbe to be saying over here is, that the Kohen has something that the Yisrael doesn't have. The Kohen has extra access to Chachma, and the Yisrael, who's in the middle, he has extra access to the Kohen has extra access to Chachma, but the Kohen doesn't have enough access to Chesed. Again, I'm not sure exactly why. I don't know if it explains that why chesed is also on the right, but it's somehow connected with the fact that the middle one is potentially higher. And the bottom line is, there's a switch going on over here. The switch is that Hashem wants to share the chachma with all of Klal Yisrael. So the bechayros are the representatives of all of us. That they sort of, through giving the kohen the money, they are accessing the chachma that the kohen has and sharing it with all of us. And in turn, the kohen, it says, it's brought in the Gemara, the kohen, he's not even here yet, so we can say this. The kohen, they struggle with kindness. They get angry easily. It's brought also that kohen is a chesed. So you have to see how the two things, but maybe that's taka the pshat, that after the Pidyon Haben, the kohen becomes a chesed. But the idea is that because you give him hey kesef, you give him 5 kesef. Kesef is always related to ksifa, to ava, to chesed. Kesef is related to chesed. So basically, there's a switch going on over here that the bechor gives the kohen an extra dose of chesed, and the kohen gives the bechor an extra dose of chachma, and that is the spiritual result of the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. Yes.
You use the kohen when you have straws, because he has extra chesed.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So usually the kohen is referred to as chesed, but it's brought here. It's actually a halacha that we don't do nowadays. There used to be, I don't know why we don't do it nowadays, I've never looked into it, but there's a concept called a get mekusher. Get mekusher means that you would write, where's Yochanan? They would write to get, and so to write to get takes approximately, depending on the skill of the server, it takes, I don't know, anywhere between 15 minutes, half an hour, maybe a little bit more than that. So we were scared that the kohen maybe just blew a fit, and he was doing this on impulse, and there's no going back for the kohen, because the kohen cannot marry a divorcee. So once he gives the get, that's it. There's no fixing it up. So there used to be this whole system of a get mekusher where, I don't know exactly how it worked, they would tie it up, but basically it was a system that made the writing of the get take extra time so that the kohen has a chance to calm down. So exactly how to synthesize between these two ideas, that the kohen is represented as Isha Chesed and also as a kapton, I don't know. I'm just repeating what it says. Now, what I would like to do now is a little bit explain the amount of money, and there's some very interesting history over here to figure this out, and there are papers going around over there with charts, which I'll refer to as we go along. What is the amount of money that we have to use for Pidyon Haben in contemporary currency? And a little bit, I sort of got into this because of the discussion that we've been having the last few weeks to determine the size of the olives and the size of the revius, and obviously there's some overlap over here because, as you may remember, that we mentioned that Reb Chaim Noah, the Chazon Ish, based his shiurim primarily on the size of the fingers and took everything from there, whereas Reb Chaim Noah used the Rambam, who bases everything on the Egyptian dirham, which is a currency, and the weight of that currency, and figured everything out based off that. As we mentioned already last week, and it's going to come up in our class today, that Reb Chaim Noah was actually, he did his best research that was available to him at the time, but it turns out that the dirhams he were using were a little bit heavier than the dirhams the Rambam was using. His were, again, all the numbers in all the books, it talks about them in grams, so I tried to do the conversion, but it's just easier for me to remember the grams, because that's what I keep on reading. So the dirhams that Reb Chaim Noah were using were just over 3 grams. It seems that the dirhams that the Rambam were using were a little bit less than 3 grams, so as we'll see soon, that's going to account for somewhat of a discrepancy. Now, an important thing to understand about currency in general is that nowadays, currencies that we use, I mean, cash is almost obsolete, but if you can imagine it, $100 bill, a dollar coin, a $half coin, those things don't actually have any intrinsic value. They're not gold, they're not silver, it's nothing. It's just I'm not an economist, but it's basically a convention that we have, and the government accepts it as legal tender, and we basically all pretend, and I'm sure there's a way it works, but we're basically all pretending that this money is worth $100, and as long as we all keep up the game, so then then that's how economy works. We have Reb Shmuel. I'm sure you guys understand this stuff better than me. However, in not so long ago, and certainly in the times of the Torah, money had intrinsic value, and the intrinsic value was based on the content, the weight of gold, silver, or copper that was present in that coin. Now, there are many. Whenever the Torah uses money, so we have shekel and we have selah. Shekel and selah are synonymous; they both mean the same thing. 1 shekel, 1 selah, and you could see on the charts, if you look at the very first chart that you have, you could see always shekel and selah are synonymous with each other. Now, I have to explain something here. The shekel of the Torah had, whatever the value of it was that value because it had a certain weight of silver in it. Now, the problem becomes, at the end of the day, a silver coin is worth more than a plaque of silver that's the same weight. In other words, if you have an ounce of silver or a coin that's an ounce of silver, the coin is more valuable. Why is it more valuable? Nowadays you might say it's more valuable because it's a collector's item, but even in the time when this was current, if I come to a store with a plaque of silver, so you have to start weighing it and see how much is it worth, whereas you have a coin. Oh yeah, I know this coin. So in other words, a coin is a much more flowing currency. So a coin is worth more. So why? So the basis for this discussion is the Torah tells you to use 5 shekel. How much is that in silver? Well, hold on a second. Before you say how much is that in silver, maybe you have to give 5 silver shekalim. That's an actual currency. So maybe you have to give, I don't know, figure out what a shekel is in dollars and find a silver dollar. And so that's a problem which the Sfarim contends with. I think the simplest solution to that problem is based on a Tosfos, where the pasuk says explicitly in Parshas Korach, which is one of the places after the whole challenge to Aaron's HaKohen status in Parshas Korach, the Torah reiterates the status of the Kohanim, and Rashi explains over there that we confirm it by giving you the Kohen all these gifts. One of the gifts is the money of Pidyon Haben. So there the Torah says that the shekel is Esrim Gera. That 1 shekel is Esrim Gera. What is Gera? So Gera is a unit that was in use at the time the Torah was given. The question is, what is the Gera unit? So someone suggests that the Gera unit is actually a unit of weight, not a unit of currency. And if you say that Gera is a unit of weight, not a unit of currency, then that explains that the Torah is emphasizing that even though I'm telling you to give 5 shekel, but my emphasis is not in giving a currency, it's about the weight of silver. Anyway, in practice, that's how we do it. Now this actually has some complicated halachic ramifications, because Rabbi, the Kohen will be here soon. He's going to come with silver dollar coins, which were minted before 1935, I believe, which at that time they had I believe a 90 or so, I could look it up exactly, percent silver. And so if you take 4 of those dollar coins, it definitely has enough silver in them. Some people use 5 silver coins, but there's no reason to. 4 silver coins for sure has enough. The problem is that, in other words, are you going here by silver or by value? The value of those coins is a lot more than the value of silver. You sell those coins online, they're worth $50, $60 each. So 4 or 5 of them is between $200 and $300, right? But he's not going to sell it to you for $200 or $300. He's going to sell it to you for the price of silver. But so is he giving you a discount? What's going on? The Kohen's not supposed to give a discount. On the other hand, you could say that I just need 2 of those coins, because even though 2 of those coins don't have enough silver in them, but they have the value of enough silver in them. Okay, so this is an open-ended discussion a little bit. L'maisa, whatever the Kohen brings, that's what we'll use, and he'll sell it to you for whatever price he could agree to give you a discount, I guess. There are some Kohenim who don't do that, who specifically use just a block of silver that has the requisite weight, and I believe that this is the reason why, because they want to avoid these type of shaylas. But it's also very common for Kohenim to use the silver dollar coins. But I'm just opening the window to that discussion. Okay, the shekel in the Torah weighed a certain amount, but then they added on it. At some point, the shekel became heavier, more silver. Now, okay, you can ask, yes?
Just one clarification before. Is there any advantage to having legal tender as the silver king?
Is there any advantage? I can't say that there's no advantage. There probably is a shitta somewhere that you're supposed to use legal tender, but it's not the accepted halacha practice that you need to have legal tender, no. And because in fact, in other words, like this, Me'ikar Adin, you don't have to give silver at all. You could give something that's worth. You could give him a laptop. A laptop is worth more than the amount of silver. For the minhag is that we don't. The minhag is to give silver. So, is there any value in giving legal currency? Maybe, but okay. At some point, there was inflation, deflation, whatever it was, and they added silver to the shekel. And it's unclear exactly when that happened. Some people held that happened in the time of, I think, of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Some people say it happened much later than that, in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. Whatever the case is, they added to the shekel, and the Gemara explains We're not going to get into exactly how we deduce this from the psukim, but the bottom line is that once we add it to the shekel, we use that new weight for all intents and purposes. So the fact that when the Torah was given and the Torah said 5 shekel, that meant less silver than it means today, that's irrelevant. We follow this new currency, which the Gemara calls kesef tzuri or salat tzuri. Tzuri, the word tzuri is the city of Tzur, which in English is Tyre. It's a city in Lebanon, which is where those coins were minted. And that became sort of the base currency of which we're all working off. Now, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Shkalim. I'll read to you the first the halacha base and gimel of Perek Aleph Hilchos Shkalim. And if you're following along in chart 1 on your sheets, you'll hopefully see that I didn't make any mistakes, and everything I'm about to say is represented accurately in number 1 on your sheet. Says the Rambam. Anytime the Torah uses this word kesef in these various contexts, so kesef and shekel, it's all the same thing. Now, very important to add, by the way, that when Chazal, this is when it says the word shekel in the Torah, in Scripture. When you find the word shekel in Chazal, it's half of that. And the reason is, I believe the Ramban explains, that the reason is, Ari, maybe you remember this, I think it's Ramban in Mishpatim, the reason is that because there was a mitzvah of machzah shekel, so people had to give half a shekel, so that was somewhere where people used shekel all the time, half a shekel, so basically ended up becoming this sort of colloquialism that we refer to the half a shekel coin as a shekel. So that changed. But what we're talking about when it says in the Torah the word shekel, this is what it refers to. How much does it weigh? It weighs 320 barley grains. Now, that doesn't match the chart, you'll see in a minute. But the Chachamim, like I mentioned before, added to it. They said that it should weigh, that the shekel is the same as the selah, which, like I said, was minted in Lebanon in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. And how much does this weigh? 384 average grains of barley. Then the Rambam gives you the breakdown. Each selah, which is the same as a shekel, is arba dinarin, 4 dinar, and a dinar is also synonymous with zuz. Dinar sheish ma'in, each dinar is 6 ma'in. Ma'in is also is the same as geira. So if you look in the Torah, in the pasuk in Parshas Korach, it says that the shekel is 20 geira, and Onkelos says that it's esrin ma'in. Right, so Geira and Me'in are the same thing. They say it's 20, but now that we've added, it's actually not 20, it's 24. Okay, each ma is 2 pudyonin. I didn't put all the currencies on the chart. Pudyon is 2 isar. Isar is 8 pruta. Okay, so the bottom line is each ma'ah, which is a Geira, weighs 16 barleys. Okay, so that you basically have the chart. That's the whole currency of the Rambam. Now, so what we know is, what's undisputed is the Torah says shekel, the Torah says selah. For Pidyon Haben, it's 5 of those. We've added, and now each shekel is worth 4 dinar, 4 zuz. Okay, how much is a dinar or a zuz? How much is that? So here is where we have a split. Sorry?
1 shekel.
No, 1 shekel. Yeah, okay. One shekel is 4 dinar, 4 zuz. So here we have a big split. Generally speaking, this is referred to as the shitta of Rashi and the shitta of the Go'inim. The shitta of the Go'inim and the Rambam and the Rif, they all go with the shitta of the Go'inim, and you have the shitta of Rashi. Now, even though it's referred to as the shitta of Rashi, it's clear and been demonstrated that Rashi didn't make this up himself. This was something he received from tradition, also going as far back as Rav Hai Goin, so the same period. It's really both shittas from the Goyim. Now this really gives birth to a major problem, because how could this is not ancient history. I mean, it is to us, but to them it wasn't ancient history. How could there be such a strong discrepancy? Not strong. How could there be a discrepancy as to how much a shekel is? And hopefully we'll at least suggest some. Hopefully we'll at least suggest some answer to that question shortly. Now, the shitta of the Goyim. Let's start with the shitta of Rashi. The shitta of Rashi is in a few places. First of all, in Rashi Masechtas Avodah Zarah, in Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, he writes that the dinar weighs the same as the zahuv Kustantina. Anybody know what that means?
Constantine?
Constantinople, right? So there was a gold coin that was in use in Constantinople, and I guess Rashi didn't live anywhere near there, but I guess Rashi knew what that was. That's the amount of a dinar. It's exactly the same with that. Okay. Now another thing is Rashi in Parshas Mishpatim, where it talks about the shekel of how much you have to give for a slave over there. So it says, Rashi says, a shekel is 4 zehuvim, which we said, 4 dinar, 4 zuz, 4 zehuvim, it's all the same. How much is it? Shehem chatzi unkia, it is half an unkia. Unkia is an ounce, it's half an ounce. Which type of ounce? Now nowadays, it's hard for us to imagine because everything in this world is so standardized. But once upon a time, there were many different types of ounces and many different types of pounds. In fact, till today, actually, it's interesting. In when you weigh precious metals, they have a different type of pound and ounce. I think each pound is only 12 ounces or something. There's anybody know about this? It's called the troy, Troy. Troy. You say Troy in America. But basically, it's a different. But the point is that when part of the whole challenge of figuring out how much money this is that when you're looking at ancient Sfarim, and we're going to soon see what the Alter Rebbe says about this, it becomes very challenging because they're using these weights, but these weights meant different things at different times and in different places. Okay, so Rashi says that the shekel, the arba zehuvim, each shekel is half an ounce. What type of ounce? The mishkal hayosho to the accurate weight. Shel kolonia. Does anyone know what kolonia is?
French?
Cologne, Germany. You said that, right? Cologne, Germany was for many, many years. They had, I'm not sure why, they had what was considered to be the most accurate and exact system of currencies, and a lot of the Rishonim refer to the Mishkal of Cologne. It's interesting that I have this in my notes here. 1 second. That the Baal Sefer HaTruma, the Aguda. Because this is relevant soon. Because when you're trying to figure out what the accurate weight is, so one of the questions you always have to ask. Remember, we spoke before. Rabbi Chaim Noah says that the dirham is so much, but it turns out that the dirham changed a little bit. He was using the Turkish dirham in the 1900s, and the Rambam was using the Egyptian dirham in whatever. So whenever you're dealing with Rashi, how do you know if it didn't change, if nothing changed? So the truth is that nowadays we have works and charts, very ancient charts, which compare different currencies, and there's ways to figure these things out exactly. But one of the points that I mentioned that we know that Rashi's thing didn't change is, first of all, the span of time in which it's mentioned. So one of the earliest references to the Shitta of Rashi is from the Aguda, who he himself was the Rav in the city of Cologne, Germany. So he certainly knew what was going on over there. And he died in the Black Plague. It's brought that he died al Kiddush Hashem. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but he says he died al Kiddush Hashem in the Black Plague, so I don't know what that means. Around the year 1340, and it's also brought as late as the year 1509 by the Abarbanel. In addition, it's also important to remember that whereas currencies change, weights change a lot less than currencies. So if Rashi is giving you a weight of an ounce, so then it's more likely to be exact. Whereas the dirham, which is the currency, so that could change more. Okay. Now another place Rashi mentions it is in his commentary on Masechtas Bechores, where he writes that each zuz is 2.5 peshitin. Omechza, 2.5 pshitin lemishkal habarzel, to the weight of steel. And in other Sfarim who quote this Rashi, they call it the I forgot exactly the word they're using in the Hebrew, if I could find it here. But basically, it's sterling. It's what we have today in England. We use the sterling. It's called sterling pound. So the history of that, they used to have 2.5 pennies. So Rashi's saying that that each of these zuzim is 2.5 English pennies. Okay, so basically, based on all these clues that Rashi gives us, and here if you look on your charts, in chart number 2, you will see, based on all of these charts that Rashi gives us, we can figure out exactly how much Rashi believed the shekel and the selah to be, based on the Constantinople coin and the sterling pennies, etc. And if you look on the end of that chart, there's the ounces and grams. It turns out, according to Rashi, that each selah is about 14.5 grams, which is about half an ounce. Okay, so that is the opinion of Rashi. By the way, if you look at number 4 on your charts, you'll see those pictures of those coins, which is, you've probably seen those pictures before. They're common on all sorts of things. There's even a wine that's available here in Chicago, an Israeli wine, which they have so many good wines with a very good hechsher, with Eidach Veidis hechsher, and they use this coin as their logo. These coins are a shekel from the time of Bayis Sheni, around the time of Bar Kokhba revolt. And now, to date, the archaeologists have found hundreds, maybe even thousands of them, and we know a lot about them. We know where they were minted, we know how much they weigh, etc. So we have a lot of clarity about these coins. But to some extent, like what they were arguing about is what is the weight of these coins. Now here it becomes very interesting because there's a whole, obviously this is a whole other kind of worms which we're not going to get into right now, is when you find archaeological evidence which supports or contradicts what you might know from tradition, what do you do with that? But here we have very, very interesting, because the Ramban, Yosef is what?
We're not discussing that?
We're not discussing it right now, because we have another 10 minutes with a lot to cover before the Kohen gets here. But what's fascinating about this is that the Ramban himself writes in his commentary to Parshas Kisisa, he brings the two opinions. He brings Rashi's opinion, and he brings the opinion of the Goinim. And I should mention already, because I just told you that there is an opinion of the Goinim, but I didn't tell you what it is. And basically the opinion of the Goinim is that the dinar, the dinar is exactly equal to the weight of the Arabic coin that was called Shashdang. Shashdang. Now the word Shashding actually, dang is 6 in Aramaic. You have in Gemara Danka is 6, and Shash is also, it's a sixth of the 6th coin, which basically what it's saying is that each dinar is six Gera, which is the same in Chazal. The one that we're using in Hebrew was also, in Israel, was also comprised of 6 parts. So they're saying that it's equal to that. Now that dinar weighs 4.25 grams, which is 0.14 ounces, which means that a shekel, according to that, would be 0.6 ounces, basically. And the Ramban explains now, within the shekel of Rashi, I told you 14.58 grams. Other people bring it a little bit lower than that. The Ramban says that the difference between the Rashi and the Goinim is a difference of 20%. That means if Rashi holds it 5, the Goinim hold it 6.
Can they use the letters? The letters on here are old Hebrew letters.
Yes, that's a different.
But the second temple they were using already.
Yeah, but they were using these as well. Also, wasn't it's not a stira.
Do we know how much the...
Hold on, very good. I'm getting to that. So Rashi, Rashi in his the Ramban in his commentary to Parshas Kisisa presents the two opinions, and he says Rashi made a mistake. It's very clear that they were added to the coin, and the bottom line is that the Goinim are right, and the Shashdang is the dinar. The dinar is, that means the shekel is 17 grams, which is 0.6 ounces, not like Rashi says that it's smaller, and it's 0.5 ounces basically. And then there's a letter from the Ramban. The letter from the Ramban was written many years later. It's published, in modern Chumashim, it's usually published right there in Parshas Kisisa as a footnote or a supplement. In the Art Scroll, they printed it there, and in others, some places printed at the end of the Sabracha, whatever. This is a letter from the Ramban. I don't believe anybody, haven't seen anybody discounting the attribution of this letter to the Ramban. And he says like this, Barcheni Hashem has blessed me at Koi so far, Shazachisi Uvasi La'akoi. I came to Eretz Yisrael, I came to Akko. And I found in the hands of some old man over here a silver coin which has in it, now look at the picture while I read this, it has in it one side, it has an almond stick, an almond, in other words a branch of almonds, and on the other side it has some sort of jar, bowl, tzloiches, plate. And both of them have very clear word lettering on them. And I showed it to a kuti, so it seems like the Ramban himself was not able to, Avram, you mentioned this, the Ramban himself was not able to read these letters, but he showed it to a local kuti who knew this language, these letters, and he read it immediately. And he said that this is the Ksav Ivri, which is the ancient Hebrew script. We use Ksav Ashuri, and but the Kutiyim still kept this script, and he said, I'll tell you what it is. This is 1 shekel, and on one side it says that it's from Jerusalem, the holy city, and these images are the staff of Aaron and his almonds blossoming, and on the other side, connected to Aaron, is the jug of the manna that Aaron put away. Okay, so now Zokter Ramban, what?
What does kuti mean in this text?
It's a tribe, a race. I don't know. Yeah.
There is a
So-
little problem though.
Hold on 1 second. One second. We're very tight on time, so if possible, we could leave the other things for afterwards. And then basically the Ramban says he weighed it, and indeed it fit with the shitta of Rashi, not with the shitta of the Goinim. It says the Ramban, based on this, I'm changing my mind. Beforehand, I wrote that the Goinim are right and Rashi are wrong. I'm changing my mind based on my finding of this coin. And like I said, today we have hundreds of these coins, and the bottom line is, says the Ramban, Rashi is right.
What people used to do back in the day, if you look like
David
the
Yehuda,
edge
I'm
of the
sorry.
coin-
David Yehuda, is this relevant?
People
Coming?
used to
David Yehuda.
they used to steal the silver.
Is it possible for this to wait till afterwards?
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I'm very, very tight on time, and I want to try and finish everything we have here. Okay, now, so we have these two shittas of Rashi and the Goinim. How do we paskin? How do we paskin la halacha? So the Rambam brings, and this is going to be chart number 5 on your sheets. The Rambam brings, he's going with the shit of the Rif, which is the Goinim. He brings that each shekel is 6. It comes out again. I'm not going to go through the whole. It's difficult to break it all down in the limited time that we have. But basically, what comes out from the Rambam is that each shekel is 6.31 Egyptian dirham. He goes exactly how much it is. It's 384 grains of barley plus a grain of charuv, of a carob, and each grain of carob weighs a quarter of a grain of barley. Okay, so we have the whole cheshbon sorted out. That's what the Rambam says. So we know that 30 dirham is connected, so 31, so 6.31 times 5 comes out to 31 or so. So technically the Rambam's shittus would be 31 dirham is the amount for Pidyon Haben. Not 30. The dirham may have been made of a different material. We're not interested in the dirham itself. We're interested in the weight of the dirham, and that weight in silver is the amount for Pidyon Haben. Now the Rambam also says that each dirham is 61 grains of barley. Now in Shulchan Aruch it says like this. In Shulchan Aruch it says in Hilchas Pidyon Haben, it's Yerdei Siman Shin Hey, mitzvah asay liftis kodesh Yisrael b'smanoy. There's a mitzvah to do Pidyon Haben. How much is it? Shloishim dirhamim kesef mezukok. 30 dirham of kesef mezukok. So how did we get from 31 to 30? So it seems already here we see that that the dirhams are changing. Remember I told you Rabbi Chaim Noah had to change dirham. Already here we see that the dirhams are changing, and the Bir HaGra says over there that each dirham is 34 grains of barley. So the Rambam said that each dirham is 31 grains of barley. So the dirhams that the Mechaber was using in the Shulchan Aruch were a tiny little bit heavier than the dirhams that the Rambam was using, and so it comes out to 30 dirhams instead of 31. Then the Ramah says, okay, look in Siman Reish Chadik Daled, how much is a ma'ah? We're not going to end that right now. V'yesh Sheimrim, which seems to be, if I'm understanding this, a different shitta, the new shitta, that actually, Hey Sloim is not 30 dirhams, rather, it is 2 golden coins from Rheinish, which is the same as 2 Polish gold coins. Okay, what exactly are these currencies? So the Taz explains exactly, he says, no, that we can't rely on the Ramah anymore, because when in the Ramah's time, the gold coins in Poland were different than they are nowadays. So you could see all the Mefarshim who write about this are busy trying to figure out exactly how much the dirham, the different coins that the different person were using, and how they've changed, and how the weights changes, and how the currency changes. And even nowadays it's difficult, but nowadays you have the internet on your fingertips. So in those days this was certainly a challenging thing. The bottom line is, the Taz says, what's the amount for Pidyon Haben? It's 5 1/4 loit. Loit is a measurement. If you look at Wikipedia, you'll see that loit is a measurement that was used in many different countries throughout Europe, and it wasn't always the same. And even within, to figure out what the Taz means when he says loit, there are differences of opinion. But the bottom line is that those opinions are very small in range. They range anywhere between 15.3 grams each to 16.9 grams each. So there's a difference of about a gram and a half, and we have about 1.5 grams range in difference to figure out exactly what the Taz means. But whichever way you say it, even if you say the bigger one, pull out your calculator, somebody, what is 16.9 times 5? 16.9, I'm sorry. 16.9 times 5 1/4. Because he said 5 1/4.
88.725.
Okay? So the maximum that the Taz could be referring to is 88 grams. So basically what it seems here, and this was in fact, historically this was always the minhag. The Sfardim for the most part followed the more expensive shitta of the Go'enim, of the Rambam, which was recorded in the Shulchan Aruch as being 13 Egyptian dirhams, 30 dirhams, or the Rambam says 31 dirhams. And the Ashkenazim for the most part followed the shitta of Rashi, which was backed up by science with the Ramban's letter over here, that it's less than that. And again, depending on exactly how much the loit is, it became, it was somewhere between 80 and 85 grams. But somewhere between, the Ashkenazim were doing less than that. The Ashkenazim were relying on a smaller reading of the Taz. It was 75 grams. Basically, it was 75 grams for Ashkenazim, give or take, and 85 grams for the Sfardim, give or take. Now, I just must mention, before we move on, I must mention the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur that, before Pidyon Haben, the Alter Rebbe writes that you should give 8 loit, the Kesem Dimdunasenu, 8 loit of the king of the Tsar, Kesar, the Tsar of our country. So 8 Russian loit. Now, the question was, so there's a tshuva from the Tzemach Tzedek, which printed in Tzemach Tzedek, but it's not actually authored by the Tzemach Tzedek. In the interesting bibliographical note, in the Tzemach Tzedek, there are many things that are printed that turned out not to have been authored by him, and they were in the same pile of paper. Somehow they ended up there. But the scholars know how to determine. For example, in this letter, he refers to the Alter Rebbe as Admor, the Rebbe, but the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't refer to the Alter Rebbe as Admor. He refers to him as Asmor, my grandfather, the Rebbe. So that's one of the ways we know that this one is not written by the Tzemach Tzedek himself. And over there he says, I don't know, it's interesting, a very interesting tshuva, a chart of all different currencies, ancient and contemporary, and how much they all work out with each other. And over there he writes that it says in the Alter Rebbe, that the Alter Rebbe wrote in the Siddur that you need to have 8 loit. I have no idea what this is about. Why in the world would you need 8 loit? So, Reb Chaim Noah is busy, he sees the Alter Rebbe, he sees the Tzemach Tzedek, and he somehow comes to this very strange conclusion that the Alter Rebbe is referring to 8 Polish loit. Now, I have no idea how Reb Chaim Noah could have possibly come to that conclusion, because Alter Rebbe writes explicitly that it's 8 Russian loit, the case of the Medina Seno, the Tsar of our country. So I don't know what he means. It could be it was just a little bit of a detailed mistake that Reb Chaim Noah made, because in fact the Polish loit and the Russian loit were different, but not very different. Only they were slightly different. Reb Chaim Noah himself, as we mentioned before, Reb Chaim Noah had a bit of a difference in the size of the dirham. The dirham was actually about 2.85 grams, and Reb Chaim Noah was the difference was he was using a dirham that weighed 3.2 grams, so the difference got him to 96 grams. So Rabbi Chaim Noah says that actually the amount of Pidyon Haben is not 75 or 85, but rather 96 grams, and he says that the Alter Rebbe is writing 8 loit. He says it means Polish. Let's see if we can work with Russian. It comes out to about 102 grams, somewhere around there. So therefore, says Reb Chaim, no good. The Alter Rebbe was just rounding it up to a local weight. Instead of saying 7 loit, point this, that, and the other, we just rounded it up to 8 loit. There's a lot been written on this Reb Chaim Noah. It doesn't seem to add up from many different sides. There's also there's a Yid by the name of Weiss who published in Yagdal Torah in Yerushalayim, where he tries to come up with a different way of reading the Alter Rebbe. Alternatively, you could just say, look, whoever wrote this Shuvah in Tzemach Tzedek said he doesn't understand it, so I certainly don't have to understand it. That's another approach to this whole plantanish. Whatever the case is, there is this 8 loit from the Alter Rebbe. It doesn't seem to be clear exactly what it means. The bottom line is that Reb Chaim Noah's opinion seems to have become, in the last few generations, in other words, since Reb Chaim Noah, possibly a little bit earlier, I'm not sure, but it seems to have become prevalent that in fact we use 96, that it's become the minhag that we use 96 grams. So even though halacha l'maisa, 96 grams is probably much more than you actually need, but that became the minhag that we use 96 grams, and some people even round it up to 100 grams, again for the same reason that we like to round things up to an even number of a contemporary unit, and in most countries in the world, grams is something that is used a lot. So it comes out to nowadays somewhere at 96 to 100 grams is the minhag in practice. Although I believe I've explained very elaborately that it may be quite a bit less than that. Now, I just want to finish off with one point. I asked you before, how is it possible that Rashi, how could there be two opinions? It's like there wasn't ancient history at the time. How is it possible for there to be two opinions? So one suggestion I saw, which still needs to be further explored, is like this: that at the beginning, remember we were talking about the difference between currency and weight. So it could be that it has been suggested, and you have to see exactly if and how this fits with all the different sources. It's been suggested that actually there's no machlokas at all. It has been suggested that there's no machlokas at all. That really the amount of the goinim are saying a bigger shitta because they're not using currency; they're using weight of silver. So Rashi is telling you how much it is in the currency, and like we discussed before, currency, whatever currency it's going to be, has more of a value, and possibly some suggest that Taka matches with the 20% that we were talking about before. That currency has more of a value than plain silver, gold, than plain metals. So when Rashi's saying that it's only what comes out to 75 grams, that's because he's using currency. If you're using currency, that has more value to it. If you want to give me a plain block of silver, good, a plain block of silver is worth less, and therefore that matches up with the shit of the goinim, that you have to give more. If you're giving just plain weight in silver, that doesn't carry as much spending value as a minted coin does. Again, without getting into nowadays the fact that minted coins have collector's item value. Just even contemporary. If you walk into the store with a weight of silver, so I have to start weighing it and this and that, it's clear in the Gemara in a number of places that the Gemara calls it nascha. Nascha, plain metal, is less valuable than a coin. So that's possibly a way to further explore how to synthesize between the two shittas of Rashi and the Goinim. The Maisa, as we said, the minhag is to do it in that way, to use at least 96 or even 100 grams, and that remains the minhag lepoil, even though, like I said, strictly speaking, we could probably use a lot less.